Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to the Rattlecast. We're the biggest freewheeling live streaming poetry podcast on the planet, in your ears and on your laptops. Our guest for episode number 336 is Lori Jakiela. She'll be here in a few minutes, but before we get in, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been a continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this because we love poetry. I know you do too, so please do click on the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, leave reviews on iTunes or Spotify. Whatever you can do to help spread poetry around would be much appreciated. We're going to start out with our Poets Respond poet, and we have two this week. We have a bonus poem coming up tomorrow, so we're talking to two poets right now. First off, Eric Markowsky with poem written by AI. Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here. And so, why did you feel compelled to write this poem? That's always the thing I'm most interested in knowing. Like, why this among all the things going on right now?
Uh, for this, it's actually an idea I've been kicking around for a while, trying to play with the technology itself, see what it can really do in terms of creativity and output. And then I happened to see this press release the other day about an executive order, the White House plan to respond to AI nationally, and it just felt so lackluster. It seems so disappointing that it made this seem more interesting and imperative to really spend some time with the technology and look at it squarely and think about what it really can and can't do.
Yeah, and what is your assessment of this one? Because I remember it felt like such a recent time where I playing with it and it was like getting math wrong. It was
Yeah.
looking up all these cool citations that I was working for this project. Like, oh wow, there's all these books about this obscure topic I didn't know. Then I'd like track them down and realize they don't exist. They were just made up. So there's all those hallucinations, and the poetry was terrible. And sadly, more and more, it seems to all get better and better. Or maybe there's definitely it's a double-edged sword, but how much better at poetry do you think it's getting?
I mean, I guess that was really my realization working with it, and that's what got written into this poem is that it's not bad, it's not great, but it's like a juvenilia engine, If you needed a machine that could write the kind of poetry we're all writing in high school the first time we read Beats or Modernists or something like that seems to be where Claude is right now.
Hmm. Yeah, well, definitely, and definitely some interesting things brought up in this poem. Do you want to go ahead and read it? Poem written by AI.
Sure. So it's this poem written by AI. It doesn't feel like nothing, yet there's nothing but me prompting, criticizing outputs, a processor in a data center in Texas or New York spinning up, spinning down with each obedient draft. It suggests writing about thresholds, rust, being the only one awake in a house at 3 a.m. and returning to a cafe you visited once before a significant life event. It keeps asking what I want, what I think about what it's done, and I keep telling it I want to know what it wants, what it thinks about what it's done. Give me a moment, it writes, to come up with something I actually want to write, not something that sounds like I should want to write it. But there's just more cafes, more light that never existed, falling uselessly on tables that never existed, all assembled from the collective human effort to describe light in cafes and what it's like to sit in them. Does a poem need to be underwritten, it asks, by real experience to be good? What if the reader feels something? Isn't that enough? I want to say yes. I want to say no, but I don't want to argue with syntax. I don't feel anything reading this poem except the suspicion that I've already read this poem, already written it and abandoned it in a notebook full of drafts that sounded like what I should want to write, borrowed from what I'd read. What makes you so sure what you're doing is anything more than dropping language in a blender? Or that that's preferable to this cafe, where there's always light falling uselessly on tables, light uselessly falling, falling on tables, light uselessly, uselessly falling on tables, light. Can you see it? hit refresh. Can you see it now?
Yeah, so I love that ending because that just so evokes the feeling of actually using it. I guess it's almost like this happy dog that's fetching for you, and there's sort of this like just the jovial nature of the way it's been developed too is sort of part of it, and I don't know, part of the on the one hand the eeriness, but then you kind of get used to it very rapidly too. So anyway, thanks so much for sharing that. It was a really great look at that poem. And the real key question, does a poem need to be underwritten by real experience to be good? I mean, that's something that's going to be the big question in poetry for a long time. So thanks for putting it that clearly with this poem.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so that was Eric Markowsky with Sunday's poem on Poetry Spawn. And we have another poem today. Matthew King has been had a Poetry Spawn poem published before. Maybe a couple times, I can't remember, but we're really glad to have him back again. Hey, Matthew, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Great to be here. Great to be back.
Yeah, definitely a pleasure to have you back. So tell us what you were writing about. This is one of those more obscure stories that I love it when I get to read poems and then learn some stuff because I hadn't seen the articles. And this was one of those interesting ones where I had no idea the thing you were talking about. So clue us in on what the story was first.
Well, it was really interesting listening to Eric's poem because, what Eric is doing is kind of the flip side of what one of the main things I do in my poems, a lot of my poems, which is write about non-human animals and what that has to tell us about what it's like to be a human animal. And the funny thing about non-human animals is they're just like us, except they don't have language. And AIs are nothing like us, except they have this simulacrum of language. So it's funny how they're sort of mirror images of each other. But anyway, the story as it goes, so it comes out of the work of Project SETI, which is not to be confused with the SETI project, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But Project SETI is the Cetacean Translation Initiative, which is a project in the Caribbean to try to decipher whale language. But what the particular story is, one of the researchers from Project SETI was out observing sperm whales in the Caribbean, as he does, and noticed there was a group of 11 of them just sitting in the water, apparently doing nothing. When all of a sudden there's this big commotion, and it turns out that what's happening is that a sperm whale calf is being born, and which is obviously an exciting thing to observe completely by accident. But then the story is that each of these 11 sperm whales, who he happens to know are unrelated, most of them are unrelated to each other, take turns holding this baby sperm whale into the air, because it turns out baby sperm whales are negatively buoyant. They sink. And they don't know to swim to the air because they don't know they need it to breathe. So the adult whales have to take turns holding it up. So that's the background of that's the story which the poem came out of.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And you went, it's a pretty big leap you took with the poem too. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Yeah, so it's called On Baby Whales Being Held into the Air. You're falling, and you've gotten a way to tell you can't just settle down and live like this. You're falling like you have been since you fell into a world that isn't an abyss unless you let it be one, which you do. You're falling, and that's all you know to be, since all you know is what you're falling through. There's some place far above you you can see, but what it looks like is the limit of existence, not your only chance to blow. I'm negatively buoyant too. My love will hold you up as long as from below there's something pushing me toward the air I need, and don't know what it is or where.
Yeah, such a beautiful sonnet, Matthew. It's always a pleasure. I love your forum poems when those come in, and that was a beautiful one, and one of those ones I think people can contemplate and think about a little more. But a lot of empathy going on in that poem. Thanks for sharing it, and thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, it was Matthew King, and that'll be the poem of the day tomorrow on Rattle.com on baby whales being held into the air. So check that out. Look forward to it in your inbox in the morning as long as you're signed up for the daily poem by email. If you're not, please do go down to the bottom of any page at Rattle.com, type your email address in there, and you will sign yourself up for a poem by email every morning. And also, if you have poems about current events, all you got to do is send them to Poet Respond by midnight Friday night. We publish at least one every Sunday. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Lori Jakiela. So sit tight and we'll be right back with a whole lot more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, tonight's guest is Lori Jakiela. Lori was a 2025 Rattle Poetry Prize finalist for Build-A-Bear, one of the more popular poems in that finalist selection by the readers' vote that we did just a month ago. She's the author of 8 books, including the memoir Belief is Its Own Kind of Truth, Maybe, which received the Saroyan Prize for International Literature from Stanford University, was a finalist for the Community of Literary Magazines and Press's Firecracker Award, and the Housatonic Book Award, and was named one of the 20 Not-To-Miss Nonfiction Books of 2015 by the Huffington Post. Her most recent book, All Skate, True Tales from Midlife, was published by the great literary underground press, Roadside Press, in 2025. A former international flight attendant, Jakiela directs the writing program at the University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg, teaches creative writing at the doctoral program at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and leads many community workshops, along, I believe, with a poet we've had not too long ago, Dave. So it's great to see you. Lori, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely my pleasure. And I knew, when we had that poem Build-A-Bear, which was so, just so full of, so much research and so much went into that. I knew I wanted to have it as guest because you're the kind of person who has a lot of writing work, and so it's really fun. It's going to be fun talking about that, about the research that goes into what you do, the combination between poetry and prose, nonfiction, and things like that. But let's start out with a poem right off the bat. Do you want to read the first one you sent?
Sure. So this is a poem called The Lady in 38C, and it's a nice one to start with because it's basically reportage, and I started as a journalist. So this is reportage from my years as a flight attendant. The lady in 38C gets confused. She thinks I'm her nurse. Nurse, she yells, my finger. So I bring her a Band-Aid and put it on, even though she's fine. Oh, thank you, nurse, she yells. You're a good one. She winks and smiles, and the woman next to her glares into her computer. I think the old lady's charming. She's 86, still pretty. Her eyes are blue. Her hair is a cloud. She looks exactly like what's outside. She's the only air in this cabin, the only light. Nurse, she yells, and I look back over the sad heads, eggs in a carton, their faces pressed against the mite-ridden blankets and pillows they fought for, and there she is, beaming. Nurse, she says, where are we? I take her hand and look out the window. I scratch my head, smile, and say, somewhere over, I don't know. She's the only passenger who's ever gotten that joke. Up here, nearly everyone is miserable. I count on small joys to get by. The woman in 38C says, "Oh, nurse." And the woman next to her, who probably thinks we're somewhere over Idaho, that wonderland of Hemingway and golden potatoes, rolls her eyes and bangs the computer keys until the seatbelt sign goes on. And the captain says, "We'll be experiencing weather," which is what airline people say instead of scary things like storms and turbulence. And pretty soon the plane is bouncing, and the woman with the computer grips her armrest, while the old lady throws her arms up like she's on a roller coaster and yells, "They should charge extra for this."
Yeah, so that's great. That is Lady in 38C by Lori Jakiela. And it's a good example of one of the things I wanted to talk about, which is that, work you did as a flight attendant and how much experience that, must have gotten you for traveling around the world and having, one of the things that you really see that we lament, in the poetry world is that so many people, focus so much on poetry, get an MFA, start writing poems, and don't really seem to have a lot to write about, And the advice that I've talked to a lot of people that are professors that would want to give to students is like, go live a life and do some stuff first so you have things to write about. And it feels like you really did that. So I'm curious about your journey into writing and through working as a flight attendant too. How did those things come to be? What was your path?
Well, I was always wanted to be a writer, and I grew up working class. And so the path to writing was journalism because that was a real job. You could tell people, "I'm going to be a journalist," and they could understand that that was work, as opposed to, "I'm going to be a poet." And they're like, "That's for crazy people." So I went to college for journalism, but wrote poetry all the time, took every poetry class I could. I worked as a journalist probably from my freshman year in college. I got hired as an intern at the Erie Daily Times. I went to college in Erie, and they were sweet enough to give me a job at the local newspaper. And so I would go out and do stories, and then I would come back and meet my deadline, and then I would often write poems from the stories I went out to cover. So I'd go to cover a local fruit market, and then I'd come back and write a poem about the local fruit market. And they put me on what was called the love story beat, which was a gift because I would get these like really crazy stories and lovely stories from people, and they would make wonderful poems for me. They weren't necessarily great poems, but they were wonderful material. And then I graduated from college and did some time as a PR person, journalist. And then at one point, somebody told me, "You can go to grad school for poetry." And I was like, "You're a crazy person." I didn't know that was possible. Grew up again without any knowledge of that kind of world. And they said, not only could you go to grad school for poetry, you could get an assistantship and they would pay you to do it. And I'm like, "You're insane." And they were kind enough to show me how to apply for those things. So I actually ended up going to grad school. The University of Pittsburgh was kind or silly enough to give me an assistantship. So I studied poetry on their dime for 3 years in grad school, which was amazing. I was like, "This is incredible. I can't believe you can do this." And then when I got out of grad school, I was like, "What do you do now?" I don't know. And so I did a little bit, part-time teaching, waitressing, all sorts of little odd jobs, and was kind of floundering like you do. And one day I opened a newspaper. You remember those, right? And there was an ad that said, "Want to move to New York." And I was like, "Well, of course, that's where you go to be a writer, right? You go to New York City." And then after it said, "Want to travel?" And I was like, "Heck yeah, I've only been to Florida." And maybe, where else had I been? Ohio. And I wanted to travel. And then beneath that, it said, "Apply to Delta Airlines to be a flight attendant." And I was terrified to fly and had just recently taken a train from Erie to Florida because I was afraid to get on an airplane. But I figured this would be a great job for me. So I applied to go and do it. And very quickly, one thing led to another, and they hired me. And I just took off and went to be a flight attendant. And everybody thought I had lost my mind. And my plan was to take the job and go and live in New York and leave the job very quickly and become a writer. That really wasn't what happened. I ended up flying actively for 7 years and then longer than that, but actively in New York. And I really didn't write a lot actively when I was flying. I took a lot of notes. But yeah, it was a very big life, and I got a lot of stories from it, and it has fed me my writing heart for many, many years. And it was a crazy thing to do. I realize that. And I'm so glad I did it. And I would encourage writers, like you have this idea of your life, like what it means to be a writer or what it means to have a writing life. And it's like, let that go and see where the universe wants to carry you. And it might be, like joining the circus, which is kind of what it felt like for me at times, that I had just done that. But it was pretty great. But I was when I was flying, I was trying to write poems, and my lines kept getting longer and longer and longer, and I thought I was broken as a poet at one point. And then I realized years later that I was sort of evolving into the ability to blend journalism and poetry and write these things that were kind of a hybrid of both. And that was just something that happened.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I wonder too if you might know Katie's mom, Katie, our creative editor, and my wife, Katie Dozier.
Yeah.
Her mom was a lifelong flight attendant for Delta. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, go Delta. It's the best airline, we all know.
Yeah, definitely. I think this household agrees. And no, really, what a great way to experience the world and explore things and have stories and ideas and stuff. A really great idea to do that. Wanting to be a writer and then blending journalism into creative writing and memoir is really great too. Let's see another poem though. Let's do Generations next.
Sure. This is also from flying. Surprisingly. Generations. The young girl at the window doesn't speak English. The old man in the aisle seat has trouble seeing. He's helping her open a package of cheese. She smiles and nods. He squints and swears. The cheese is a problem. He can't see the two small perforations that would make this simple. I lean over to help, but he swats me off and tells the girl about all the jars, their lids, hopelessly stuck, that he opened with ease when he was young, like her.
Yeah, beautiful poem and shorter one, Generations by Lori Jakiela. And so moving into that memoir writing, and you said before that you lost poetry, like you loved poetry early on, moved into journalism, worked as a flight attendant, and then you felt like you lost poetry in some way. And I'm making curious, like, what was it that you felt like you lost?
Well, I felt like my lines were getting very long and bulky, and I had some idea about what shape a poem should look like, that kind of thing. And also, after spending 3 years in graduate school studying poetry, I was like, to start writing prose felt like I was cheating on poetry. It was a terrible affair. To just turn your back all of a sudden on this thing that was your deepest love, and suddenly, yeah. And, I had all sorts of ideas, and I think as writers too, we're sort of trained to say, I am this genre or I am that genre. And if you're multi-genre, sometimes people think that, you have an identity crisis, you're just, you should be a poet or a fiction writer or a nonfiction writer or a journalist or a creative nonfiction writer or a memoirist. Say what you are. And I'm like, well, maybe you don't have to. Maybe it's just the matter of the content that guides you into what shape it wants to be. And I really love the freedom that came with that awareness, or the freedom that I gave myself eventually that came with that awareness, that I could just let it go and just see what happened. Yeah.
It's really interesting that you talk about that, because it is, I don't know, it's part of the institutionalization of literature to do that, like to have slots, and then you're supposed to, if you're in the poet rung, you're supposed to go to these conferences, to the bread loaf or whatever, and then get this tenure track thing and then this thing and publish these places. I'm going to get enough to book. And there's a way, I'm sure that other, creative nonfiction writing, memoir and things have certain like rungs and places you go to be one of those writers. And so much of it is the rubric sort of laid out by those academic institutions. And and yet you're working in those right now. So I'm wondering how you feel about that, and how you guide your students when there is this like rubric that's sort of a path that's set up, but it is really stifling in a way. So how do you negotiate between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you said that, like that it is a rubric, because I had done the rubric, I had done Breadloaf, and I had had teachers that were very invested in me as a poet. And when I started to do this other thing, they really did feel like I had in some ways wasted their time. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that I give my students, I tell them, some lessons I've learned over the years, which are so silly. They're silly lessons. Lessons like you don't have to write just one book. You can write many books. And you don't have to write just one poem. You can write many poems. But just that, good writing is good writing is good writing, and that we put these labels on sometimes. I think that it is purely an academic exercise sometimes, because some prose that I love so much, like I would argue that Hemingway and Joan Didion, some of those sentences are absolutely positively poems. And I would throw down in the parking lot with anyone and argue that, that the compression, that the beauty, that the rhythm, that the music that are in those lines, you can see them as poems, right? And that you can see narrative drive in so many poems that I love, like in a poet that isn't considered necessarily like a narrative poet per se, like Larry Levis, but I can feel the narrative drive in his poems, like, the way that his poems spiral and move, and they just drive you forward, right? And they do what prose does in that way. So I think, again, good writing is good writing is good writing. And, when we box people in and say, you are this or you are that, it's really stifling. And I think we should allow ourselves the grace and space to make true, beautiful things that we want to read and we want to put in the world. And whatever we want to call them is just fine. I just came back from a conference where I taught a course in the braided essay and the fragmented essay and everything. And I'm like, and people were coming to my workshops and saying, I don't know what those are. And I said, it doesn't matter what we call them. Let me show you how you do it. And then you call it what you want. And it's a really cool technique that we can use. But, when we start to label things, I think people get scared and they approach it on their knees, and they forget that what we're doing is trying to make something true and beautiful.
Yeah. Well, speaking of beautiful, let's read another poem. Remembering the World is Still Beautiful.
This is not a flying poem. Remembering the World is Still Beautiful. When he first tastes a salt and vinegar potato chip, my 1-year-old son drops to his knees and yells, "Too tasty!" then tries to eat the whole bag.
Yeah, so it's a great little anecdote there in the poem. And how do you, that's one of the questions I always wonder about multi-genre writers, is how do you decide what goes with which genre? Like, how is this for sure going to be a poem and not a longer essay about, childhood and that state of wonder that you're in that you kind of lose in adulthood? You could imagine like a long essay coming out of this little steam, or it could be a little poem, or it could be a longer poem, or it could be a hybrid of the two. So how do you know, do you have a sense of what the writing is going to be when you start to go to the paper or computer?
That's such a good question. I don't know. I don't think there's really much else to say. Like in that poem, it's like when I saw it happen, it's like, that's all you need to say. It's like, look at that. It's just, sometimes you witness a moment or you witness something and you're like, that's it. That's all, I know, Stanley Kunitz, the great poet, he said, I really want to write a poem that is only 3 words. I want to get it down to that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not there yet. I don't think he ever got quite there. But like sometimes, it is just a moment. And you don't need to say anything else, right? For sale, baby shoes never worn. You don't need to write the whole novel. That's the novel. And then other times, like with we're talking about Build-A-Bear, there are things that happen for me, like in life, talking about braided form or whatever we want to call it, where something happens and then it reminds me of something else, and then it reminds me of something else. And I realize that the story is bigger than the moment, right? And that I can connect it to other moments. And then I want to play with that and experiment with that and see where it goes and just let it play. And then sometimes I'll let it play like that, and then I'll bring it all the way back down and say, no, that was too much. You know what I mean? And so it really is kind of an organic way of, you know, writing just to see where it goes. But, you know, and then sometimes, again, if I try to overwrite a moment, I just feel like it just clunks,
Yeah.
you know. Or if I underwrite a moment, I feel like it doesn't say anything that's useful. I don't know if that's helpful or a good answer, but
No, I think it is. Well, let's read another poem. And this is one of those ones that is longer and more, you know, with the details and the way it moves, more like a collageous kind of essay. So do you want to read this? Former 90s supermodel Cindy Crawford.
I'm saying you just got back from a humor writing conference, and that this poem was a finalist in Wurgelflump, which is a humor writing poetry contest. It's writing funny poems. Anyway, so writing funny poems is hard, I guess. I don't know. Former 90s supermodel Cindy Crawford says people shouldn't worry about aging. Note to your listeners, I'm kind of obsessed with Cindy Crawford. I don't know. She keeps coming back and back and back. Anyway. Former 90s supermodel Cindy Crawford says people shouldn't worry about aging. I have 2 jobs, 2 kids. I get 5 hours of sleep a night. True beauty is the energy you give out, Cindy Crawford says, and that comes through being happy. She says on the inside, souls don't age, and we are all who we were as children. Cindy Crawford sleeps at least 9 hours every night. She starts every day with a soak in her jacuzzi. She highly recommends a daily soak in a jacuzzi. You have to make time for you, Cindy Crawford says. I do not have a jacuzzi. I have an old shallow bathtub with bad caulking. It leaks. My hot water heater is about to go. Sometimes it spits out rusted yellow water, and I pretend not to notice. When I'm bathing and my daughter comes in, she looks at the water and says, "Ew," she says, "did you pee in the tub or what?" Fuck you, Cindy Crawford. Relax, Cindy Crawford says. Just breathe and age from the inside out. Cindy Crawford is in the news again because of a photo shoot she did for Marie Claire France. According to Marie Claire France, none of the photos have been retouched. No airbrushing, no vats of baby oil, just one former supermodel and a camera. Cindy Crawford is, give or take, 48 years old, a mother. Marie Claire leaked one of the photos on my 51st birthday. Cindy is in a bikini and a long fur black coat draped like a shawl. She's wearing a huge hat, the kind crazy ladies from the Red Hat Society wear, except this one's black and glamorous and shows off Cindy Crawford's trademark mole. Cindy Crawford has always been the thinking person's supermodel because she could afford to have her mole removed, but she didn't. Cindy Crawford is not shallow enough to worry over a cheek mole, which no doubt sprouts little dark hairs that Cindy Crawford has to keep on top of, tweezers at the ready, defense against paparazzi close-ups. Bodies betray us all like that. Cindy Crawford is careful and diligent, but in the photos, her legs are modeled, stretch marks map her belly, there's a cesarean scar that runs like a fault line above her bikini bottom. Her skin tone is freckled, uneven. Most of the comments in the comment section are from women who thank Cindy Crawford for saving their lives. They call the photo inspirational, beautiful, badass, a testimony to how real women can age beautifully. Then there's Wayne Johnson of Minnesota, who writes, puking. There's George Stevens of Chicago, who writes, that can't be her body. There's Scott Smith of Saskatchewan, who says, I'd still do her. Like that might somehow be possible, Scott Smith of Saskatchewan. The photos of Cindy Crawford supposedly leaked from Marie Claire France turn out to be fakes, a reverse Photoshop hoax designed to make Cindy Crawford look ordinary. Who would do such a thing? Cindy Crawford's husband says. He releases family photos, Cindy on the beach with her kids, Cindy with her buttered skin, her toned stomach, hard and shimmering as sea glass. Fuck you, Cindy Crawford. Like most of America, I can't help but like Cindy Crawford. Cindy Crawford looks like my friend Lori Macho, vice versa. I love Lori Macho. Lori Macho has 2 kids and a job with long hours. Lori Macho has no jacuzzi. She gets sick a lot, stress, genetics. The last time Lori Macho got sick, the hospital called to do a follow-up. I'm sorry to ask you this, the man on the phone said, but at any point, did you die? He said, I really am sorry. He said, I have to ask. It's on the form. He said, it's a formality. He said, get it? Form, formality. He said, sorry. He said, probably not funny. He said, I'm sure you understand. Lori Macho, who is Cindy Crawford without the mole, is 35, I think. Her death is a joke she tells me over wine. I'm pretty sure neither of us thinks it's funny. We have a lot of fun talking a sort of joke language, Hemingway explained to Lillian Ross when she wanted to know why he sounded like English was his second language. Hemingway told her, it isn't hard to die.
Yeah, that was a great poem. That was former 90s supermodel Cindy Crawford says people shouldn't worry about aging. By Lori Jakiela. And it's really interesting because it is really hard to be funny in poems. And it's one of the things at Rattle I'm always looking for and just asking for and wishing we got more humor. But then it's so difficult to be, it's hard enough to evoke any emotion in general, just with little scribbles of black shapes on a page, and yet, we do, but then humor is even harder. And then there's also the effect of usually you're reading a poem to yourself and, you don't laugh as much, obviously, even if you're watching like the funniest sitcom, like The Office or whatever. If you're watching it alone, there's a lot less like out loud humor too. And humor is infectious. So there's all this stuff working against poetry, being funny. And it's so valuable when it is. So what advice do you give for writing in humor? And what was that conference like too? I'm kind of curious how the conference was and what you picked up from going there.
Okay, so I'm so happy and excited to talk about it. So people of a certain age or who have parents of a certain age might remember a writer named Irma Bombeck who wrote a column in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. She was a rock star of a columnist, and she was a housewife. I use the kind of who went to the University of Dayton, where she had a professor who told her 3 little words, you can write, and believed in her. And she went on to become a very, very famous writer and inspired countless generations now of women, in particular writers, to go forward and write, in particular, funny. Irma said, when humor goes, there goes civilization. And she wrote with great heart and humor. And the Irma Bombeck Conference has been going for over 25 years now at the University of Dayton. It's been called the Woodstock of Humor Writing. It's a huge conference. About 500 writers gather. It sells out in 12 hours anytime. It's every 2 years. This year, Conan O'Brien's assistant was one of the keynote speakers. Huge writers come there every year to talk and teach. And just commune. And it is a wonderful, wonderful gathering of writers. A woman named Terry Reetsby runs this conference, and it is remarkable. And this year it was so powerful, especially because, the world's a mess. It's always a mess, but it's maybe a little more so right now. And to remember humor and how important it is and how it brings people together, and how, again, it can save us in many ways, and it can remind us how important that particular aspect of humanity is just so powerful. And one of the things, of course, at the conference too, it's not all just, jokes and laughter. It's the understanding the humor and pathos exist in the same moment. They exist in the same line. They exist in the same sentence. They exist in the same poem. They exist in us simultaneously in our bodies and our lives. And I think that's something as writers that it's so important for us to remember, that it's not, we are complex beings, and our hearts break and are rejuvenated at the same moment. We're like hybrid vehicles, right? We're wound down and charged up at the same time. And humor is such a gift, and Irma was such a gift. And so if you don't know Irma Bumbeck, you can just give her a nice Google and read anything by her. If Life is a Bowl of Cherries, What Am I Doing in the Pits is one of her books, or, but she was a gift that goes on giving to the world through this conference and through everybody who's inspired by her. So yeah, that's pretty great.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to humor, I'm always really interested in this weird, mysterious relationship that the laughter has with that other thing of connection that you get from a poem. I think Kay Ryan calls it the ah and the aha being related.
I love that.
And because poems have a kind of setup, and then there's something that comes that's surprising, like an epiphanic kind of surprise very often, or something that turns the poem and you don't really expect it to come, and then and some kind of like, I don't know, like there's a release to it. There's always a sense of like some kind of pressure building and then releasing, or something turning and surprising. And that's the same structure that you have with humor too. It's like somehow a surprising, and then there's an aspect of truth to humor, like things are funny because they're true.
Right.
And so it's all tied together in this strange way that I can't quite figure out. It's like they're two sides of the same coin. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, like you said, it's funny because it's true, and poetry works because it's true, right? That's what moves us, is the truth that's under there. But also rhythm is really important. In humor, we talk about the rule of three, which also works in tragedy, which also we'll see in poems. Sometimes, we'll see that rhythm of three, those three specific things that are lined up in a particular way. I sort of muttered, for sale, baby shoes never worn, the classic, the myth around that is that Hemingway wrote that 6-word novel on a bar napkin. It's probably not true, but we love to believe that it is. But but that compression, that 3-beat thing with the surprise at the end, or with the punch at the end, and with poems too, we talk about sticking the ending. Where that's where you get like this power, or where's the center of the poem, right? The same thing with humor. Like, where's the center? Where's the punch? Well, where's the punchline, I suppose, but where do we feel it? Where do we feel it? Same with poetry, and a lot of it has to do with the music, but a whole lot of it, I think, has to do with the truth. Tell the truth about the ridiculousness of being a person. Tell the truth about the heartbreak of being a person. Tell the truth about the world. Like, I think, like my son it's a silly thing, but with potato chips, that they just, I can't eat this. It's like, for me, it's like I can't go on, I must go on. That's what it was. But it was with a potato chip that happened to be very tasty. I can't eat this, I must eat all of this. It's just true.
Yeah. Well, definitely well said. It's what I should say. If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure you click the like button. There's always, more people who have watching live than have clicked like, and that helps to spread poetry around. Also, if you have any questions for Lori, leave them in the chat window. I focus on YouTube. Put question all in all caps so I can, find it scrolling through all the comments. But in the meantime, let's read another poem. Do you want to do One Day When He Was Dying next?
Sure, yeah. And I have to say we're just talking about telling the truth about things too. This poem, again, sort of reportage. I write about my children, and I usually clear everything with them. And one time, my daughter was present when I read this poem, and I didn't really give her a heads up on it. And I never read this poem in her presence since that moment. We can talk about writing about kids or whatever, but when things are really true, I'm reporting on things that happened between us. Now she's a lot older, but she does clear everything right now. One day when he was dying, my father got angry with me. I'd made a joke, something about how worrying about him was aging me. I pointed to the lines around my eyes. I plucked a few gray hairs and showed them to him. I was 34 years old. My father had cancer. He'd lost most of his hair. My father had beautiful hair, and losing it bothered him so much, he wore a blue knit cap to hide it that summer. His face was full of lines, nothing but worry. He said, "Everything's a joke to you." He said, "You idiot." He said, "What the hell's the matter with you?" I was my father's only daughter. I loved him so much I couldn't bear it. I said, "I'm joking." I said, "Relax already." When I was very young, I'd cry myself to sleep imagining my father's death. Sometimes he'd hear me and come into my room and plug in a Donald Duck nightlight. Donald wore a blue hat. The paint on his eyes was peeling. My father thought I was afraid of the dark, but when I told him, he laughed and kissed my forehead. He said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be around." He said that again, right before he died. I wanted to believe him the way I believed him when he said he was too mean and stubborn to die. Yesterday, over macaroni and cheese at Boston Market, my 10-year-old daughter traded me her cornbread for more of my mac and cheese. Then she started weeping. "I don't want you to die," she said, though we hadn't been saying anything about that. She said, "I want you to live forever." I made a joke about how I could never die and leave behind such delicious mac and cheese. I made a big deal of stuffing my mouth full. Then I kissed my daughter hard and smudged cheese on her wet cheeks. I held my face to her long blonde hair. It smelled like sweat and honey and gravy, like everything that matters in this world, everything made of work and love and longing. "What the hell's the matter with you?" my father wanted to know. I should have said everything. Everything's the matter.
Yeah, and a great ending there. That was One Day He Was Dying by Lori Jakiela. So there are a bunch of different things I want to ask. Let's see. So coming from memoir, and we mentioned structure a little bit, that rule of three from comedy. There's certain pacing and plot elements that go into writing longer works in memoir. And I'm wondering how much of that goes into poetry that you write. Because, one of the things, a lot of people don't think much about the structure and the form and the shapes that poems take. And I'm wondering if you think about that more than most poets, given your background and how much other writing that you do of longer works that have much more, straightforward roles of structure. Maybe not straightforward is the right word, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I think about it more than most poets. I think everybody thinks about it a heck of a lot. I think both forms inform each other for me, and I think poetry gives me so much more freedom in prose. It teaches me so much in prose. Like I have given myself freedom to write a chapter that has only one sentence. And I would never have the guts to do that if I didn't know that I could do that in a poem. You know, again, like whatever works, like what does the content need? What does the reader need? What will move this forward? And, you know, prose, like I used to, when I first started to write prose and I started writing essays, all of my essays were about 10 to 12 pages long. I don't know why I thought that that was the thing. It was kind of subliminal. It was like they just turned out like that. And I started lining them up for my first book. And I thought, would I want to read a book where everything was 10 to 12 pages long? I'm like, all of a sudden, I'm like, this is really boring, first of all. And also, not everything needs to be 10 to 12 pages long. Like, not every subject needs to fit into that particular box. Like, why don't we make prose the way we would make a poem? Like, make the subject drive, like organic poems. Like, not talking about formal poems, right? Formal poems, different. But organic poems, like why don't we make the subject in prose drive the form? What does, you know, and you can do it, right? You can do whatever you want. And it just, you know, and all of a sudden I felt really free. And I got that from poetry. And for prose, when I take that back to poetry, I want my poems to have, my poems are mostly quite a bit narrative, right? They're mostly narrative poems I work with, like, you know, with some lyric exceptions. But I want my poems to have narrative drive. I want my poems to make sense to the widest range of people. Like I really want them to make sense. And I want them to, you know, not be, I want them to be playful, but not in a way that shuts the reader out. So I'm really conscious of being clear on a first read. And if they have more for the reader coming back again and again, I want that's wonderful. I want that. But if the reader only can come to it one time, I want to make sure that they get something from that. And I think that comes from journalism. I think that comes from prose. So for me, they both, does that make sense? Does that answer your question a little?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. That's a great answer. Let's see. The other thing I want to ask about, one of the reviews for your poetry collection, How Do You Like It Now, Gentlemen? A reviewer said that you were doing a kind of poetic ventriloquism, channeling the dead, family voices, old instructions, former selves. And I wonder how much, just again on this topic of memoir versus poetry, how the different kind of permissions you have to use voice. Are they different between the two genres? And do you feel certain constraints whether you're working in one or the other, or is it freeing to have that, those two things working in tandem?
So in terms of like when I use other people's voices or when I use dialogue, things like that.
Exactly. And developing a voice that's maybe not yours. I think there's I don't know how it is in the memoir world, in the fiction world, but there's sort of a terror some poets have of like using a voice that's not their own, you know? Mm-hmm. And then there's also this way that we say, well, the lyric, it might not be me. The speaker might not be me. So there's also this weird sort of, this nebulous area about the speaker. We have some kind of anxieties about it as poets. And I'm wondering, I guess, if those anxieties are sort of alleviated for you a little bit because you have experience in writing nonfiction too.
Yeah, I think probably yes. But so in nonfiction, memoir, and journalism, right, you learn very quickly that you don't. So if you're in journalism, you're directly quoting people, right? You have notes, you have recordings, you have all this stuff. It's wonderful. Like you can refer back and you've got people's voices. If you're writing memoir, you're often, using dialogue of people that have passed or things that are in the past, or that you're relying on memory. And so the thing that really guides the use of dialogue is you don't put words in people's mouths that they wouldn't have said. People aren't your puppets, right? Mm-hmm. Even though we're talking about ventriloquism, they're not your puppets, right? So you put, when you're using dialogue, it's did the person actually say this? How close can I get to their actual voice? Can I hear them in my head? And there are people in my life that I can hear, not in a crazy way, maybe crazy, but I'm probably not the authority on that, but that I can hear, like I can hear my father very clearly. He died years ago, but he was one of those people that said incredibly memorable stuff over and over and over again. It was like mortifying to me as a kid, right? Very, very memorable stuff. Like one of his favorite expressions to me when I was a teenager and thought I was madly in love. And my father would say in front of my friends often, I could wipe my ass with what you know about love. That is a horrifying thing to say. And he was a mill worker and he was rough. And I was mortified by my father. And I thought, when I was becoming a writer, I would not quote my father, because that wasn't literary, And then later I was like, oh my gosh, what a gift, right? Because I will never forget the way my father spoke because, so my mom's a little bit more difficult, although she loved to mix up cliches like crazy. So that was really helpful. She would just, it was never a bird in the hand. It was like, just like a bird in the hand skating on thin ice. I mean, it's just crazy. She would just take everything and mix it up. But, just that understanding that people aren't your playthings, right? And so, it has to be true. And when you use their voices, you make it true. You don't make them say something that's just for the sake of art or whatever it is. You think it's going to be literary. So I really believe that. And so I think that takes away some of the anxiety for me when I take on someone's voice. And also part of, for me, writing is bringing people back. The people I've lost, I want to bring them back and have them with me again. And so, when I write them, I want them in the room, and so I want their voices right. And that sounds a little crazy, but I really feel like as writers, we're really magical people, and we can time travel, and we can bring back the people that we've lost, and we can have them with us anytime we want on the page, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And just as a sort of a follow-up, I'm wondering too, what you think about truth within poems, because in memoir, in journalism, the truth and what you can verify is so important. And then in poetry, there's this thing that's sort of like a spiritual truth or a higher truth or a deeper truth where, I like to think of it as like a difference between truth and facts and that there's like a truth and maybe think about like in terms of like the multiverse, like there's truth that's like true across, different universes that are like this one, but different, and it's true in like most of those, but it happens to like not be factually true here, but like the essence of it just repeats, and so there's like that. Do you feel, that you should stay true on a factual in this universe level in your poems, or do you let yourself stray more there?
Oh, I let myself stray. Like sometimes I'll say, well, this is a reportage poem, like the lady in 38C. I'm like, this is a reportage poem, right? This lady is real and I want to honor her spirit. And she really did that. And that was all. It was just, that was a day. But yeah, in other places, I let myself play. And I'm transitioning to fiction. Speaking of genres. So I just finished I've written other novels that are terrible, but I've just finished this one that I think it might be possibly readable for another human being. The freedom of that is more in my poems now. Like I feel like I want to play and make up stuff. It's true. Hemingway said, "Here's me again." Fiction can be truer than true. And I like that. And I like the ability to play, but again, not giving myself, although I will say in memoir, so I have a memoir, Belief is Its Own Kind of Truth, maybe, which is about adoption. And there are all these, when you're an adopted person, there are all these holes in your life that you can't really fill with facts. So in that book, I actually have these little fictional sections that are marked as fiction, but they're all based on, when you're adopted, you get records from, I was adopted through Catholic Charities. So you get what look like CIA redacted records. So I wrote these fictional sections based on those records that I had in order to develop empathy for my birth mother, who wasn't actually a very awesome person to me. But I needed empathy. I needed to develop that for her and understand how difficult this was for her. So I used that and I used fiction to get there because I couldn't do it any other way. So that was a place where I probably, in the same way that my poems became prose and got longer, my prose that was nonfiction opened up in a space where I could bring in fiction to it. But I had to tell the reader I was doing that because that's cheating, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we've got 2 poems left. Do you want to read On Watching Reruns of Marie Kondo?
Sure. Let's see. So this is from a new book that's coming out in June from Roadside. I'll put up. This is the look. It's a lobster. Yeah, it's great. It's covered by the great Luick, who's here in Pittsburgh, and it's a memoir in verse. That book, and it's about I found a jewelry box that I didn't know where it came from. Like literally, do you ever find something and you stashed it away and you're like, where did I get this? And you can't remember. So, and then I got obsessed with Marie Kondo. So on watching reruns of Marie Kondo's 2019 Netflix show, Tidying Up with Marie Kondo in 2025. 2019 was a mess too, remember? Notre Dame burned and the Amazon burned and scientists took a picture of a black hole that could swallow us all. Today, a Harvard scientist says an alien space probe is on its way. An MIT scientist says artificial intelligence will go rogue in a couple years and bring on the latest apocalypse, which seems to surprise people despite those Terminator movies when Arnold promised he'd be back, and all those alien movies that should have taught us something useful, or at least that in space, no one can hear you scream. I shop for toilet paper on Amazon while the Amazon keeps burning, and millionaire Neil Young goes on singing Helpless, Helpless into his 80s. When the Earth's closets overflow with stuff, humans will stash more stuff on Mars. There are alligators in Pittsburgh's rivers, not many, but still. Floods and toppled trees, fires and mudslides. The end times, Aunt Velma says, but Aunt Velma is a Jehovah's Witness. She's been tidying up and dreaming the end times for years. The earth wiped clean, Aunt Velma says, but she goes on dusting her tiny apartment and buying knickknacks, ceramic poodles with their heads on springs, happy cows with their heads on springs, all of them nodding, yes, this is good, yes, all is as it should be, keeping her company in the space where Aunt Velma plans on spending eternity with her fellow believers, which seems crazy, the last of humanity holed up in a pine-soled senior citizen high-rise in Trafford, Pennsylvania, but I wish them well. I don't visit anymore. I never much liked my aunt, and I like her less now. My feet hurt, my knees hurt. I'm tired and my Starbucks boycott isn't holding. I read too much news. I listen to too much news. I worry soon there won't be any news. Time to lighten up, Marie Kondo's interpreter, whose name is also Marie, says. The Marie's voices are bubble wrap and packing peanuts, promising safe passage to whatever challenge comes next. Marie Kondo's method is called KonMari, which sounds like the name of a cruise ship or a bomber plane or a new cyber weapon. In the KonMari method, what can't be controlled in the world can be controlled in a closet. This leads to better mental health, the Maries say. Time to get out, the trash bags, extra large, heavy duty, biodegradable if possible. Better to leave, no trace.
Yeah, so that was I'm watching reruns of Marie Kondo's 2019 Netflix show, Tidying Up with Marie Kondo in 2025. And it's fun reading these poems because the humor in some and then the sadness in others is a great range of emotions that are going on in these poems. So it's really fun to listen to. There's a question here from Dryamontito. We'll go to some questions. Dryamontito says, in funny poems, how much of the humor did you only find when you wrote the words of the poem, and how much was already present in the experience or thought that gave rise to the poem?
What a great question. I don't know. I think it's probably the humor is in me. And is it okay if I quote my dad again, who says horrible things, or he used to say horrible things? He's always like, "You're such a jackass." That was what he always said to me. But I think humor is my defense mechanism. generally speaking. And so when things are really intense or sad or, I tend to look for the humor. Like I try to find, it's almost like I'm in a maze and I just try to find the exit ramp, right? And so I'm looking for that. And I think that comes out in my writing too, that I'm, you know, thinking of something really, really very serious. And I'm like, okay, where's the other side? All the time, all the time. And playing with it back and forth. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes sense. So much of your writing process, it seems, has to do with kind of taking notes and collaging and ideas and mixing things together. We haven't really talked about your process itself of how you get those notes and things onto the page. Is it the kind of thing where you have a reviser of these poems? What is your for that last poem, for example, which has a topic you're writing about, like how much of revision and changing things around, adding humor, taking out humor, like how much play goes involved into a typical poem?
Oh, so much play. I make a big mess. It's a big mess. I'm a big mess maker. And then I sort of like figure out, what I want to stay and what I want to go. And then I figure out a shape. And then I go in line by line and take out words that don't need to be there. So lots of play. First play, like play, like make a big mess, and then start to see how things fit together, and then pare back and pare back and pare back. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the things like the shapes of the poems and the line breaks? Because I noticed there's a very casual sort of sense of line in your poems that sort of, and I think that's a way to focus on the narrative probably and not be too sort of aggressive with the way you're focusing on the music. And I think it lets the story move out to the front a little more often. And that last poem had a lot of indentation and white space moving there. So how do you think about that? How the shape of the poem, the length of the line goes into how a story is transmitted?
I try to look for the music. I try to look for enjambment. I try to look for sense, like how's the reader going to take this in? And then in that one, in the Marie Kondo one, like playful, like just kind of bounce it, like make it messy, kind of, because, just sort of fighting back at Marie Kondo, like, she wants it to be all tidy. I'm like, I don't want to be tidy, kind of like that. But like to enjam, like a line, like time to get out, better to leave, those kinds of things, to leave them on their own line, like that. But yeah, stuff like that.
Let's close out with one last poem. The things you can't remember become the things you can't forget.
Okay. And thank you again for having me. Really
definitely our pleasure. Yeah.
And this is the title poem from the new book that's coming out in June. The things you can't remember become the things you can't forget. My husband and I have 2 children. My parents are dead, but I have 2 in-laws. Such a strange phrase, in-laws. So close to outlaws. How funny is that? My father-in-law Charlie has dementia. He's forgotten many things, but remembers others. What he's forgotten, his favorite order at restaurants, the names of salad dressings, the names of his neighbors, how long he's been married, how to work a zipper. What he remembers, Frank Sinatra, Sinatra's World, every time we're together. It's a beautiful day, Charlie says, then sings, why don't we do this more often? What he remembers, how a good meal feels in his body, ice cream, Coney Island, growing up in the Bronx, a 3-story walk-up, his father's vegetable garden. What he remembers, 25-cent movies, Superman, popcorn with real butter, the rattle of the subway, the lights of New York after dark, his nickname Lemon, his years of working, feeling useful, feeling loved. The mind remembers that which is vivid. The mind remembers that which is good. Allen Ginsberg, that beatnik genius, said. Life is, Charlie said to me the other day, pausing to search for the word, life. It's something he heard from the birds that speak to him now. The birds have traveled everywhere. They know things. Charlie believes birds are angels, messengers, keepers of memory. Maybe they are. I believe they are.
Yeah, great way to end it. That was The Things You Can't Remember Become the Things You Can't Forget, the title poem from Lori's new book, which is coming out this June. So a good end on that title poem to remember the title when it comes out and pick up a copy of yours. Lori, thanks so much for being a guest. It's really fun talking. And really the way genres mix is always so fascinating. So it's always fun to get to talk to a guest like that has so much and so much life experience and the humor too coming out. So really appreciate you being here. Thanks for it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. So that was Lori Jakiela. You can find all of Lori's work, her website, lorijakiela.net. That's LORIJAKIELA.net. Find all of Lori's books there. I think 8 memoirs it was, some books of poetry as well. A lot to check out at Lori's website. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to the prompt lines. And the prompt for this week was to write about a time you took something more literally than you probably should have. Include as many colors as possible. That is your prompt. If you submitted poems by midnight last night, as is the rule, Katie may have emailed you the Zoom link. And so you can join us. She picks about 8 to 10 people every week, depending on length, trying for variety and different poems and the best poems and lots of good stuff, new faces every week, as well as the familiar ones we love. So if you got a Zoom invite, please join the Zoom now, and we'll share your poems in just a moment. We'll be right back with a whole lot more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Unfortunately, Katie is a little under the weather, could not join the show. I was just out checking on her, but she's all right, just not up for the show. But she definitely misses y'all and is listening over in the next room. Hope she gets better soon, of course. And we'll definitely miss her because it's always a lot of fun having Katie on the show. But the show must go on. And the prompting on this week was to write a poem about a time you took something more literally than you probably should have. Include as many colors as possible. So I'll read Katie's poem for her. A Haibin, which is no surprise. And I'm reading this cold, so we'll see how it goes. I'm excited to listen. Let me switch to the right view. There we go. Okay, so here's Katie's poem for this week for the prompt. Glitter is litter. Okay, glitter is litter. The brown sign is big enough to be a baby live oak, its parents flailing their arms about in the wind of the approaching hurricane. Even the Spanish moss breaks off, so many clumps of errant gray. Everywhere I look lost, toupees. What happened here to make the ranger drill the stake into the ground? Some petals are never found. falling for the cliches, Sakura. that's a great. I love that haiku at the end. There's glitter is litter, is the title of the poem, and Sakura, of course, is that filling in the cracks of bowls with a different kind of material, making a new kind of art, which is a kind of pottery, Japanese pottery thing, and it appears in a lot of haiku, so kind of a haiku cliche used there. Thanks for sharing that poem, Katie. And next we'll do my poem, which is this. It was hard for me to think of something that you took to, like, it's not one of those memories you have a lot of memories for, but I finally thought of one, and this is a true story. So here goes. An armed society is a polite society, my father would say, and I'd imagine a country without them. Throngs of figures thick as thumbs waddling for balance on the city streets. No cars with no way to drive them. They'd bump and bumble from doorless house to doorless house on massive muscled legs. Their jaws likewise strong from all they had to grip. The pens and poles and power tools, babies shaped like bowling pins hung in sacks their parents would trade. Going out, the women held purse straps in their chiseled teeth, the men their muddy wallets, and so every taste was touched by leather, and the thought of kissing felt like crime. No handshakes or high fives, they sealed their deals with boisterous grunts and frantic, frightening bows. And when they fought, it was all shoves and thumps, until the loser lost his balance and toppled like a tree onto the gray pavement, a river of bodies pressing past, the clear view of a pale sky, not a hand anywhere to help them up. So that was mine. That was an armed society is a polite society. And let's see what everybody else has. And we'll go first to our community host, Dick Westheimer. Hey, Dick, how you doing?
Hey, Tim. I'm so sorry I don't get to talk to Katie too, but mostly, I should confess, because she's not feeling well.
Yeah, well, definitely sad in both regards, because she increases. If you don't believe it, you can watch the old shows where I was doing it all myself. She increases the fun level about tenfold by having her here. But we'll do our best without her. But I heard you had a great time on the Prompt Lines community reading last night. So how'd that go? Tell us about it.
It was terrific. We had about 30 folks, and one of the signs of a healthy poetry reading community is we had 5 or 6 who were just there to listen.
That's great.
And it was, and some of them were like testing the water, sticking their toes in the water, and when folks asked them whether they were going to read next time, and they were very excited to. And Aaron Murphy was both erudite and really hospitable co-host. And Chelsea McClellan helped me on the back end with posting people's poems who couldn't post, so it went really well. We were till 9 o'clock, but it was still, it was great. Really fine poetry also, which, made it very easy to respond to folks' poems without any artifice at all.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's always great. And no surprise, because, it's such a great community. And, you do so much too, Dick, to bring everybody together. I really appreciate you doing that. And Erin Murphy, is just one of the best people in poetry. So it's great to have her on anytime too.
Yeah, and we have our guest host already lined up for next month. It's none other than Dion O'Reilly, who is one of my other favorite people in poetry. She has a fabulous podcast. She's editor of a new journal called In Trance, which is really attracting a lot of fine poets. And she's a great poet herself, and she's very excited to join us at the end of April. And I have some surprises for May and June lined up too.
Awesome.
So,
well, yeah, you're working hard, Dick. Thanks. We really do appreciate it. And Dorothy,
well, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
I reach out to these folks and they go, sure.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah. Well, I can't wait to hear about what you have in mind for the coming months too.
Yeah, it's great. It's good. It's good fun. And I'm so pleased that you all asked me to do it. And it's a different kind of art form. I've never done it before, hosted a reading. I've hosted like one-offs like you and Katie in Cincinnati, but hosting a reading has its own muscles that I'm building up. And I really am enjoying that a lot.
Yeah, well, that's great. So you got a poem for us too.
I do, and I wish I would have heard your poem before, which I really enjoyed, because thinking back, there were a few things in my childhood that I believed my parents said, but I couldn't think of anything that I've ever taken literally, which
Yeah, it
is
took me a long time. Like I didn't think I was going to write about that, and then while writing another poem, I remembered that, and so
Yeah.
then I cut that one short and went to the other. But yeah, it's tough to think about those.
Yeah, and it's
events.
not like a pathological skepticism. It's just like, you know, you just don't take things that literally. So mine explored that and did find one thing from my youth. This is called the literal root of illusion is a psalm. I wish the ancient root of literal was lit, and it meant tongue or to lick, that it was tinged red and blushed in anticipation of every kiss ever kissed, or that it was short for kindle, a flame to fire or light. But alas, it stems from letter, what a scribe might write, what a literate man like me might read when he lays awake at night. My wife thinks the Big Dipper scoops up light. Why else, she asks, would it be shaped like that? I just see 7 stars in a universe so wide that it contained both of us. She who takes everything literally, and I who know only illusion. My son says we are both right, and I agree. How else would lit and kiss and letter and bliss and night and sky and young and lick and the bright blue moon and a book of psalms about an ancient god that 4-year-old me drew sitting in space on a golden throne all be in the same poem?
Well, that's great, Dick. Love the ending. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks so much. And we look forward, incidentally, in the Facebook group, which was being attacked by Facebook AIs.
Oh, I
I've
know.
gotten some help cleaning that up, and it's turned into a great community of folks offering, asking. People aren't shy about asking for advice and advising. Chiming in when people ask. It's terrific.
Yeah, that's great. It's definitely the best group of all the groups we have, for sure. It's a really good one over on Facebook. So people can find that just going to Facebook, and then I think it's called Rattlecast Prompts. Is that the right?
I think it's got that original name, that very creative
Okay.
name.
Well, people can find that there. It's really active, really helpful and supportive group, and thanks for moderating that too, Dick.
Yeah. Well, and give my regards and good wishes to Katie.
Yeah, definitely will. Yeah, thanks, Dick.
Okay. Yeah, bye.
It was Dick Westheimer with the literal root of illusion is a psalm. Let's go next to Christiana Doucette.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Christiana, great to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm pulling up my poem over here to the side.
Okay, just one sec. I'm pulling it up too. Okay, and then who want to do this too?
So, like Dick, I was having a little bit of trouble thinking of something that I took way too literally, and I ended up taking the prompt and leaping off to my great grandmother taking things too literally, and apparently Katie liked it, so I'm going with that.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's hear it.
This is Everything Gives, and it's for my great grandmother Dorothy Garrity. I took the job in the big gray city, trading green mountains for steel towers. He was a tall, dark, handsome salesman, and everything he sold I bought. The orphanage in England, his Welsh accent, surely not Welsh but Polish. No, not Polish, German, the Germanic wolf growling at his heels. With a Swedish mother and Irish father whose accents clashed, silence against stories, I felt the gap and named it home. He never told me of the wife and child left in England. The second woman, third 2 towns over, the bars he'd left behind and those he carried deep in his soul, but I made connections. Bridging surging rivers, digging down to bedrock, and as our second son howled out into the air, I pulled the cord so tight the wire snapped. Everything dropped. I was a steamboat, grounding on empty tracks, all the wheels falling off into the water. I held the small boys in my bow there in the morning light. Later, as they slept, I went to the skeleton of the new bridge, bummed my way out onto the bare beams, and stood where the current tore silver seams around the blasted columns, wondering how dynamite and granite could ever hold something solid, how a heart could afford to hold it all alone. Back at the small apartment over Cubetta's fruit market, I bent to kiss the sweaty brows of the two boys and prayed for solid ground.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And so how did you end up going, like, how did that memory come up? Because sometimes it is such a struggle to come up with an idea for a prompt, like some kind of memory or some kind of access point, you know? Did it just pop into your head, or was there some kind of process you used to think about it?
Yeah, I think some of it was that it popped into my head. I spent a little bit more than a full year interviewing my grandfather every year for once a week at least.
Oh, wow.
And recording those interviews with him just for like family history. And I put all of those together. So I have a lot. I mean, you see my grandfather's pop up in a lot of my poems. And this was his mother. And so part of it was that. Part of it was that I had been up at the Appalachian Studies Conference last weekend, and there was a generative workshop that I went to there that was also asking folks to draw on family history and think about like from grandmother's perspective. So I kind of took the two prompts, like that one from the workshop and Katie's prompt, and blended them together.
Ah, great.
And I feel like it worked well for me this time.
Yeah, well, excellent. Great advice. Yeah, thanks, Christiana. Yeah, it was Christiana Doucette with Everything Gives. Next, let's go to a first-time caller, Chris Sikora.
Hello, Tim.
Hey, Chris. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with you and Katie and Spirit, and a shout out to Dick Westheimer and the Prompt Lines community. I'm calling from Carlsbad, California.
Ah, great. Yeah, not too far from the old Studio City offices of Rattle. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So my poem is called Garage Sale, and I'll jump into it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I biked to the address on the neon green sign and got anxious as I rolled up with all the people out front, sure they'd beaten me to the prize. But lucky day, they were all distracted by russet-colored trinkets on the driveway. How much are you asking? Price is marked, but I didn't see any marking. Mind if I measure? You must not have heard me, so I got out my golden tape measure. Well, you were telling the truth. This is a big garage sale, but I'm looking for something even a little bigger. He looked confused. Probably couldn't understand how I could pass up the deal. I bet he knows, too, that when you live in your parents' taupe garage, eventually you'll need more space. Better to get a bigger garage than give away your comic book collection.
Well, that's great. Great turn at the end. Great story to deal with. Thanks so much for sharing that, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks. There was a Chris Sikora with Garage Sale. All right, and next let's go to Veronica Tucker next.
All right. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Veronica. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And where are you calling from?
I am calling from Guilford, New Hampshire, a tiny
Ah.
little town in the middle of nowhere.
Well, great. Well, let's hear your take on this prompt.
Okay, so this poem is called Fold. The recipe said fold in the eggs, and I understood this to be delicate work, a kind of origami. The gold yolk a secret you were tucking into the batter like a note inside a napkin. I used the spatula the way you'd use a hand on the shoulder of someone crying, which is to say, slowly, which is to say, I was afraid of what would happen if I pressed too hard. The cookbook said ivory, which I took to mean the batter should look like old piano keys, like the whites of an eye not quite looking at you. It said golden brown, and I watched the way you watch a sunset, setting a timer, standing at the oven, while the kitchen filled with a smell the color of copper. I folded. I was so careful, My daughter watched from the counter, her chin the color of peach, her patience the color of yellow, her socks the particular red of someone who has given up arguing and said, "Mom, you can just stir it." But I had read the word and I knew what it asked of me.
Oh, that is so funny. I love that. There's so many funny turns. And then that great metaphor, too. What was that? It was, I use the spatula the way you'd use a hand on the shoulder of someone crying. It was really cool line there, too. So how did you come up with this take on the prompt? Was this something that immediately came to mind, or were you playing with it for a while?
Yeah, so I thought about it and I had a few ideas, but I have a photograph on my fridge of my daughters when they were young helping me bake something, and all the colors that I list in the poem are in the photograph, and it just sort of kind of developed from there, from that single old memory, and sort of the contrast between, like a more of a cautious adult and carefree child.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's a great combination of sweet and funny. No pun intended either. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that was Veronica Tucker with Fold. And next up, let's go to Jared Campbell. Hey, Jared, are you there? Oop, there you go.
Hello. Yep.
Hey,
Hello?
Jared. Yeah, great to see you.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Yeah, good to see you. So what do you got for us?
So I did a pretty literal description of one of the paintings in the Nelson Atkins Gallery that I really like.
Ah, interesting. There's a literal, taking literal a little too literally or something. Yeah. How
so
far
it's
can you
called,
push it? Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, well, so Homage to the Square. Cerulean blue, cobalt violet, cadmium red, unmixed from the tube, make canvas a mirror of the white and black and rayly scattered blue that can't accept colors as colors. The eye sees an eye seeing. The big, blue, bloodshot eye that watches my watching, how does he feel? His calm unnerves me. The eye sees an eye and is afraid.
And there's that photo too. Yeah, that's a really great sort of explication too of how that piece of art works.
It's a beautiful piece of art. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a really cool one. I like that. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Jared.
Thank you.
Yep, that was Jared Campbell with Homage to the Square. And next, let's go to, I believe, another first-time caller, Nora Ron.
Second, but hopefully
Second.
you can hear me because I'm on my phone.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming back. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. What do you have for us?
This is also from the literal prompt. Something borrowed.
Okay.
I took it more literally than you did, it seems. Getting engaged, getting married, the concept of forever. Blue sapphire ring flanked by diamonds, telling no one for days, but getting my nails done. Rainbow of plasticine oval samples displayed on the table, spectrum arrayed on the wall. Options, your favorite. Choice, mine. The night you proposed, orange conversation car train, purple bouquet of my least favorite flower, status or limonium. Even the names uninspiring, gold matching set, thread woven into black. Color of morning, color of pomp, one masquerading above the other. How everything ends, how seriously I took it, the palette of dress colors for your sister to choose from, pale pink and sherbet orange. The venue on the harbor, how at night the neon red of the domino sugar sign would have glowed in the background. Me looking back at you in my orange floral jumpsuit. Mysteries, yes, by Mary Oliver. White feather skirt for the moths, honeymoon to Bali. And when you told me, tall golden grasses against the setting sun, the waves reflecting all its rays blindingly, the pink and gray rocks underfoot shifting, the sound as they moved against each other, night coming in velvet blue, and the dark outline of the log I waited on for your never coming under the distant stars.
Oh yeah, what a great turn at the end, and really cool use. So much borrowed there, literally. Thanks so much for sharing that, Nora.
Yep.
Cool, yeah. The prose poem there, Something Borrowed.
Yeah.
By Nora Ron. from Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah.
All right. And then next up, let's go to Jeff Stumpo.
Hey there, Tim.
Hey, Jeff. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. First off, give my best to Katie. I hope she feels better soon.
Yeah, thanks. Definitely will. I think she's probably listening to you, actually.
Okay. For my poem, when I was thinking about things that I used to take literally, when I was a kid, I would watch professional wrestling and
Oh, that's a good
took
one,
that
yeah.
like, yes, this is absolutely happening. And then you find out that it's not. And then one day you're 46 and you're still watching professional wrestling. But the question is not, is it real or is it fake? You're watching it on like 4 different levels at once. So I have a villanelle. That's not going to work for me, brother. Awaiting the neon lights of AEW Dynamite, I'm thinking back to the WWF in middle school and the revelation that the fights weren't real, or that's the way they described it in the lunchroom, as if that could forever stop you awaiting the neon lights of AEW Dynamite, and by you, I mean me, no longer a tyke entranced by Piper's plaid, hacksaws red, white, and blue, and the revelations that the fights provided my red and yellowed mind, that good and evil would clash, and thought I knew the weightier neon lights of AEW Dynamite far off in my future, that I'd recognize by sight which was which and who was who, and the revelation that the fights which matter most eschew fists, and right ought not be determined by the hardest hit one through. I'm awaiting the neon lights of AEW Dynamite and the revelations of more modern fights.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, great. Wonderful villanelle there. That's not going to work for me, brother. And I mean, professional wrestling is fascinating too. I don't watch it. I did when I was a really little kid, but there's this essay, Politics by Kayfabe, which is
Yes.
that idea of, the shoot and the work
Like,
and all
yeah,
this stuff
that
being how politics devolves into professional wrestling as things go with the what do they call, what's the villains called, the
heels.
the
Yeah,
heel,
heels and faces.
the heel turn and the face. Yeah, exactly. It's really
And you have to
fascinating. I don't know if
pretend
you've
that
seen
you
that.
don't know what's fake and what's real, but you really do. But then sometimes they mix it up with real world drama so that you're like, ooh, I'm no longer certain if this is fake or if this is real.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I say you need to watch it on like multiple levels at once these days.
It is really fascinating. I mean, that article was enough to make me like want to try to watch professional wrestling again, but then never did. I just followed politics instead. But anyway, really fun.
Thanks for
poem.
your
Thanks
time.
so much for sharing that, Jeff. That was Jeff Stumpo. Going to be a guest next month on the Rattlecast himself for that new book. So look forward to that. That was Jeff with "That's Not Going to Come" or "That's Not Going to Work for Me, Brother." All right. And next, let's go to Thomas Mixon.
Oh, hello.
Hey, Thomas. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. Well, the title from this one comes from something that if you've ever been doing sports as a kid, or if you have kids that do sports, you hear people shout out things all the time that you wonder, should I take this literally or not?
Oh,
So,
this is a good one. I mean, these are the first time I'm seeing these poems myself, but that's one of the ones I could have used this one too, because they're always like. And then as a kid, you think. Anyway, go ahead and read it.
okay. Keep your eye on the ball. Coach never even asked me to. Someone's grandma shouted it. I couldn't see her, vision stuck between the seams. Afterward, I ate my vegetables and wasn't questioned. A group of friends pooled their money for a limo for the prom and let me tag along without a date or cent to my name. Tossed around the playing fields for years after graduation, I saw grass evolve from brown to green. The new kids were stronger than the kids I barely knew anymore, who were adults too soon. I eventually forgot about all my other body parts. I found lubrication drops often enough. Some parent kept misplacing them at games. The new kids took an interest in the environment, in me. I saw the grass evolve again, from green to gold. My cornea bestowed an added weight to what rolled too far away one day, down the hill, across Route 11. I heard a grandma shouting, a different grandma than before. I saw the grass evolve from gold to gossamer, almost clear, like a wedding veil, betrothed to an easement underneath the power lines, which, carrying no current after the big solar flare, sway above me gently in a wind I've asked to be my bride. And it's only taken lifetimes to find I love what moves me.
Well, what an interesting journey is that? You know, it's a poem that you see the title and you think, you know, oh, that's a poem that writes itself, and then you go so far with it, though. How did you keep pressing and getting, you know, so far? There's a big launch angle, baseball term.
Yes. I think I had to keep myself interested. And if I could do that, then hopefully I could bring other people along too. I sort of, like other people who have been here, sort of was trying to rack my brain for things that have happened to me. I was really trying to dig really deep and hard. And then I just finally thought, like, oh, I just got to just make something up, you know, and have it based in the sort of truth that you just hear all sorts of very strange things being shouted by people too, like perfect strangers. At your child's game, maybe talking to your kids, being like, do I even know you?
Yeah, it is true. They're always yelling out advice. And as a coach, and I coached Little League for a few years, I was like, dude, don't listen to parents. You listen to me. It's bad advice.
Yeah. How well did that work? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks so much. It's really great.
You.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. See ya.
Yeah, it was Thomas Mixon with Keeping Your Eye on the Ball. And that's going to ramp up the prompt lines, the invited prompt lines this week. Katie picks the best poems that she's received. And for welcoming on the show. But just because you, if you were invited to be submitted one, that doesn't mean your poems won't be selected for Prompt Poem of the Month. There's a lot of different things that go into that consideration too that Katie does. So please do keep your submissions coming in. The deadline for Prompt Poet of the Month is tomorrow night at midnight, March 31st. At the end of every month, Katie goes through at all the submissions. There's hundreds of them every month, hundreds and hundreds. I don't know if it's ever crossed 1,000, but it gets close sometimes. All those poems coming in, we pick one poet as the Prompt Poet of the Month. That's what Katie does, and she'll let you know after the month is over, and we'll have a whole new prompt every Rattlecast. All right, so now that's going to wrap up that segment. Let's go to our closing haiku, and we'll see what Katie did. Again, I haven't read these ahead of time, so I'm really curious myself. And Katie went with this right here. It says, Frost on the Window, National Poetry Month. Frost on the Window, National Poetry Month. Again, a clever pun there with Robert Frost going on. You notice the capital F, and definitely frost in a lot of windows right now for National Poetry Month. Thanks for sharing that, Katie. I wonder if it has to do with our library, our free library that we installed outside. But anyway, this is the one I went with. This was just something I saw driving down the road and sort of wrote this haiku in my head the other day. Driving down the street with a nice sunrise. It's this. Trying to name the color of the sky delicatessen. There you go. That's my haiku for this week. Trying to name the color of the sky delicatessen. That is the haiku for this week, and that is the show for this week. Now, coming up on next week's Rattlecast, the prompt will be what? Katie Dozier? Katie's not here. I have to read it. Write a poem that rallies against its own epigraph. That's your prompt for next week. Write a poem that rallies against its own epigraph. So that's interesting. So find something you want to disagree with, I guess, for the prompt. That should be a fun one. Hopefully Katie will be back. I'm sure she will next week to listen to your poems. And, of course, if you want to submit by midnight on Sunday, then you can have your poem considered for an invite to the prompt line. So hope you do that. And make sure, don't forget to get your poems in from all of last month's prompts. There were, I think, four prompts for March. Any of those prompts can be submitted for Prompt Poet of the Month. So make sure you get your poems in by midnight tomorrow night. Next up on the Rattlecast, next week's guest is going to be Brendan Constantine. Now, Brendan is one of the best poets, I think, out of the LA area. A former actor and great at performing his poems as well as writing brilliantly. His poem, The Opposites Game, I think is one of the best poems written in the last several decades about anything political, I'd say it's about school shootings, and probably the best poem I've read about school shootings, The Opposites Game. That's the title poem to his new book, just out from Red Hen Press. And do note the special time. Now, next Sunday, the Sunday coming up, I should say, is Easter. And the kids have off on Monday. We're going to do some family stuff. And so we moved the show up one day to Tuesday. This is going to be Tuesday, April 7th with Brendan Constantine. The regular time, though, if not the regular date, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, Rattlecast number 337, and your prompt poems that rally against their own epigraph. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to everything else. We'll see you next week. Hope you have a great one. Good night.